Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. We have been trawling the PS1 catalogue to find 10 hidden gems for every letter that maybe got overlooked or ignored, be it because they have crap names, bad graphics, or sometimes they were just released at the wrong time and overshadowed by bigger titles. This video is going to cover 10 hidden gems starting with the letter F. Now, this wasn't an easy one as there were a ton of FIFA games, Final Fantasy games and Formula 1 games that I thought shouldn't really be included, but I do think the list I have here is a solid one. As always, let us know what other games should have been included for this or any other letter. Now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button and we take a look at some games. First up is Fade to Black, released in 1995 from Electronic Arts and Delphine Software. This is actually the sequel to Flashback, which was released for the previous generation of consoles. Here you play as the stupidly named Conrad Hart, who committed genocide in the previous game, blowing up an entire planet. After being in suspended animation, you're captured by some of the surviving race called the Morphs, and let's face it, you're rightly so, sentenced to death. But of course you escape because you're human and your life is worth more than any other species, so you have to explore a bunch of very large 3D levels packed with enemies and puzzles for you to solve in order to escape. The game has okay graphics that are a little sparse on detail, however the animation is very smooth and the abundance of FMV cutscenes do look great. There's a nice variety of environments to explore too, and you'll be exploring bases, mining colonies, planet surfaces and more as you get deeper into the game. At one point you even get to control a rocket ship. It's not an easy game, and part of this does come down to the stiff controls that definitely take a while to get used to and are showing their age. It is all very deliberate though. The game uses tank controls so you can rotate left and right. You also have a sprint button and a jump button. To attack you press square and you go into your attack stance where you can then aim and fire. You've got a pistol that has unlimited ammo, which is nice, and of course you can find different ammo types along the way, as well as other items like bouncing bombs, keys and health packs that you can use at any time. Combat can be tricky though, as you have very limited movement when you're in aiming mode, so you need to be sure that you've positioned yourself correctly and no one can sneak up behind you. Enemies range from evil lizard morph creatures that can shoot you with homing rockets, as well as having the ability to morph into a slime that comes after you, and if it touches you it's instant death. If you die, then it's back to the start of the level for you. There's also robots as well as traps and gun placements in most levels. Thankfully though, levels also have healing stations throughout them that you can use as many times as you want, and it's often worth backtracking to do so as there aren't too many checkpoints in the game. What I do also like is that you have an indicator that comes up on screen whenever enemies are nearby, showing you where they are, so it's rare that you're taken by surprise. But even with this, it's hard to kill anything without taking damage. I found my best bet was to take it slowly and use corners and obstacles to block enemy shots.
You do not have the key.
The large levels require a lot of exploring and you'll need to check every nook and cranny for items and keys to progress. Often there are some slight puzzles, but it's never anything too major, and I really didn't find I was stuck at too much at any point, or that the game got tedious because of it. The game does have minimal music, but it does a good job of adding to the atmosphere. The sound effects are the same, it's all about atmosphere here and it does work well. This is one of those games that really takes you back to the good old days of game design, where there's loads to do but no hand holding. It is a very tough game, but one that is perfectly beatable once you've played it for a little while, and you'll get used to how it all works. I really like this game, and it's one that I'd love to see get a remaster or even a sequel. Come on, sort it out. Fatal Fury Wild Ambition is an early foray into 3D for the series that was a close contender to the Street Fighter games and from SNK. The game manages to keep the same high quality gameplay of the series as it transitioned into 3D, and while it doesn't hold up quite as well as the 2D versions, it is still a solid fighter. You have a dozen or so characters to choose from, with more being unlocked as you complete the arcade mode. As you'd expect, each character has their own special moves and plays quite differently from one another. The controls here work a little differently to other fighting games you might be familiar with. Here you have 3 attack buttons and a dodge button. The attacks are punch, kick and strong. You can use a combination of all these buttons to pull off new moves, though I will be honest, I did find it pretty hard to get any special attacks to work. Even putting in the usual Street Fighter commands players would recognise didn't work a lot of the time, even though they were supposed to. The timing has to be perfect for these, and button presses must be very accurate. You do get used to it, but there were definitely times when I just didn't bother using special moves, or I'd take a beating because I couldn't get a move to work. But it's still perfectly playable. Graphically, the game looks decent, with some detailed characters and excellent animation. Everyone has their own location to fight in too, which is always nice. There's only a couple of game modes here, which is a bit of a shame, with an arcade mode and a versus mode, and while these are still fun to play, it would have been nice to have some mini games or something to break things up. Not that I ever really play those in a fighting game though, I suppose. Something else that's probably the biggest disappointment here is the sound quality. The voices are all really low quality and sound more like they belong on the Sega Mega Drive than the PS1. The music is also pretty generic and instantly forgettable. However, the fighting is still solid enough, and it is fun to play. It doesn't feel like any of the other fighters I've looked at in this list, and the cool roster of characters makes this one an interesting one to play if you're looking for something new to learn. Felony 1179 is a strange game that really surprised me with how much I like it. It's a driving game that reminds me of a cross between Crazy Taxi and the driving sections of the Die Hard trilogy game. You play as a notorious driver who's been hired by a rich bloke to discover some artifacts and steal things that return them to him. You do this by driving around one of a handful of levels, crashing into things, and really that's about it. Everything is done to a time limit, and you rack up damage costs as you play. The quicker you do things and the more destruction you cause, the better. You get points for smashing just about everything in the levels, and it's cool to find hidden areas like being able to drive through airports and shopping centres, smashing everything within them. Of course, the levels are littered with traffic and you can smash them too, but watch out as you can wreck your own car, and there's no way to fix it during the game as far as I can tell anyway. What's cool is that there's a ton of other vehicles for you to unlock with all this. This depends on how well you perform in various levels. You've got 4 vehicles to start with: your truck, a sedan, a mini and a Vespa. These all control very differently, and it does actually make a difference which one you use on each level, as something like the mini or Vespa are more suited to the narrow streets of the Paris stage, whereas the larger, faster cars are much better for the more open city and beach stages. It's a very short game, and you'll be able to beat it probably in less than an hour, but that is kind of the point. But you'll need to learn the maps and get good at the game if you want to be able to unlock the new cars, one of which is a damn tank. The game looks decent enough. Again, it's very similar to Die Hard Trilogy's driving sections, and it does control well enough, if a bit stiff. But the difference between the vehicles means there will be a few that work well for you. I also really like the fact that it doesn't take itself seriously at all, and seeing the pedestrians running and screaming is always fun, which is a good way to sum up this game. It's just fun. It is very short and not all that challenging, but the time trial nature of the game works well and means that you'll likely come back to it often, just to blast through it and see if you can unlock just one more vehicle. Here is the unfortunately named Finger Flash, a game that was only released in Japan, but you can find English versions out there if you're as edgy as me. Now, this is a very simple, addictive and frustrating game that is somehow really hard, even though it isn't. Allow me to explain. Here you choose from one of 2 characters, but it doesn't matter who you choose, it's just cosmetic. Then you set off down some very narrow pathways where enemies are constantly coming towards you, and you just have to move in front of them and shoot them. Simple, right? Well, not quite. Each enemy is a different colour, and each button on your controller does a different attack, and each enemy can only be killed with a certain attack. For example, the red enemies are killed with the attack from the X button, the blue ones with the square button, and the purple with the circle button. This is simple enough, but if you shoot an enemy with the wrong coloured attack, another enemy will appear in front of them, and if just one enemy gets to the bottom of the screen, then you die and have to restart the level from the beginning. What's cool is that the enemies are often in clusters, and if you shoot the right one, then you get a decent combo and all the enemies are killed. But the game moves very quickly, and you need to have amazing reactions to get through it, without pressing the wrong button. If you press triangle, you can freeze everything on screen for a few seconds, but you can only do this 5 times as indicated by the red blobs at the bottom of the map. This definitely helps, but you'll be panicking a lot while playing this game, so expect to use a lot of continues, which by the way are unlimited, which is nice. The controls here are spot on as you'd expect, so you really only have yourself to blame when you lose. The graphics are all 2D sprites and they look good, but aren't really anything special. The levels do vary and there's a ton of them, but you will see the same stage design for quite a while before it changes up. Not that you'll have a chance to really notice the stage design as you'll be so busy focusing on what the enemies are that are coming up. And really, that's all there is to the game. It's sort of a puzzle reaction shooter that's bloody hard and frustrating, but kind of in an addictive way that's kind of hard to put down. I'm pretty rubbish at the game, as I would always forget what button kills what enemy, but I can imagine that once you get better at it, it feels so good to blast everything in the face. I was crap, but I had a really good time playing this, and I do recommend you try it out if you can. Next up is the Firemen 2, the sequel to one of my favourite hidden gems on the Super Nintendo. This is exactly what it sounds like. You play as a pair of firemen who are at a huge theme park where everything has gone tits up. There's fire everywhere, the machines have gone haywire, and there's people trapped all over the place. So you go here armed with your unlimited supply of water to rescue people and to save the theme park. You've got a couple of ways to put out fires. You've got a standard stream that fires all across the screen that you use most of the time. This is effective for pretty much all larger fires, though it's not too strong. Then you also have a hose that fires directly onto the floor to get smaller fires. This is actually more powerful than your usual beam and can be used on the larger fires too, but of course you need to be closer, so there's a bigger risk of you taking damage. You also have water grenades, which are very powerful, but you have a very limited supply of them. You'll notice that you also have your little mate with you who's with you all the time. He can use his axe to put out smaller fires, and what's cool is that unlike the Super Nintendo original, here a second player can take control of the chirpy little bastard to make your life easier. The graphics here are decent, it's all 2D sprites, and while it's definitely an improvement over the SNES game, I don't think it really shows off what the PS1 could have been doing. However, the whole thing still looks good and fires will spread if unattended, but there was the occasional slowdown in particularly smoky rooms. The game is divided into levels, with you starting at the entrance to the theme park and making your way deeper into the grounds, having to deal with different rides and attractions. Most of the game just sees you putting out fires, but it never gets tiring, and I often forgot that you have a timer to deal with too, which is a shame as I did want to explore a lot more than I could. There's bosses in the game as well, in the form of larger fires or machines that are out of control thanks to the fires. These are all fun to fight and they give the game a real old school feel. There is also a surprising amount of story here too, and sadly all the voices are in Japanese and there's no subtitles. And unfortunately this is another game that never left Japan as far as I know, and there's no translation that I could find. So yeah, if someone could fix that for me, that would be great. I really had an absolute blast playing through this one, and you can still do very well without knowing the language, though sadly I did get stuck at the end of the second or third level after a cutscene where I couldn't exit a room. Now, I'm not sure if the game glitched or if I was meant to just do something that I wasn't aware of because the people speaking were talking in Japanese and I maybe just didn't understand what they told me to do. I do get the feeling that that's what the problem was. However, I definitely will be going back to this to try again. I really like these types of games and this one is very enjoyable. If you're a fan of the first one, then definitely give this one a go. If you've never played the first one, well, give either of them a go. They're both excellent games. From Firemen to Fleabags now with Firo and Klawd. This is an isometric shooter where you play as a pair of anthropomorphic cops, one being an orangutan and the other one is like a wolf rat looking thing. Here you set out to clean up the streets from all the dodgy gang and take down some animal crime lords. It's kind of like if Sam & Max was an action game. The game here can be played in two-player co-op, with one player playing as Firo the ape and the second as Klawd. Unfortunately you can't choose who you play as in single player, though there isn't really much difference in the way they play. It's an isometric game with pre-rendered sprites that all look okay but aren't spectacular, and the animation is pretty jerky, but I do kind of like the whole animals in a criminal underworld setting. It kind of reminds me of Meet the Feebles, which is a movie that everyone should watch if you want a crazy ass time. Anyway, you explore a bunch of urban settings, killing enemies with a range of weapons from shotguns and machine guns to homing rockets and grenades. You kill anything that walks, and if you spot any posters with your ugly mugs on the wall, make sure you collect them, because for every 10 you get an extra life, which is nice. The levels in the game aren't particularly long, which is actually a blessing, but they are all quite similar, though they do have a variety of backdrops. But the game never really boils down to much more than run around shooting everything you see, though to be fair that's basically my favourite thing to do in a video game, so I did enjoy doing that. What's cool though is that the game does actually try and mix things up with gallery style shooters and things like that being thrown in every now and then, and they tend to be just at the right time so things don't get too stale. The controls are okay, but certainly not great. You can run and jump and even have a duck button that lets you avoid enemy attacks. Annoyingly though, there is no strafe option at all, which is really strange in a game like this, and it definitely needs it. It makes avoiding enemy fire really tricky, and the fact that the game does have slightly dodgy hit detection and wonky shooting just exacerbates this. However, there are a few health packs in the levels and plenty of weapons knocking about that will help you kill most things before they kill you. Something to look out for though are the landmines, as they look just like every other item or weapon in the game, except here if you touch them you will die. At first I thought I was meant to pick them up, but no. This can be especially dangerous as you do only get a handful of lives and then it's game over. There's no saves, passwords or even continues, which is pretty annoying and means you'll need to play the game a lot to learn the layouts and enemy placements. The game definitely doesn't take itself seriously though, and has lots of references to other games as well as comics and TV shows, which is cool. There's also a ton of cutscenes, and these are all done pretty well and usually try to be funny with kind of mixed results. Overall though, this is actually a pretty fun, if unpolished game that is especially good in 2-player co-op. Floating Runner from Zing Entertainment is a cute little 3D platform game where you choose from one of 2 characters, of which it makes no difference who you choose. You then run about some 3D worlds, mainly consisting of floating platforms, killing enemies, finding treasure and looking for the exit. The game has a really cute and colourful style to everything, and I kind of like how it looks. It's very low polygon, but it does work. Your character can do a few things, mainly running and jumping and shooting, but that's all you need. As the game's name suggests, there's a ton of floating platforms and these must be navigated until you find the exit. Of course there's a ton of enemies all over the place too, mostly animals, but there's also some robots and things like that thrown in there as well. Your main enemies though are the platforms, which often lead to death if you fall off one. There are 2 kind of big issues with the game, the first one being the camera, which is kind of at a funny angle, and while you can control it very slightly, it's just a bit too close to you, making it hard to judge distances, so you'll be falling off things a lot more often than you'd like. As well as this, most platforms don't cast a shadow, which is a pretty strange choice, as the whole game is about floating platforms. Combine this with the camera and it makes it really hard to know the exact height and location of platforms that you're trying to jump on. Thankfully, your character does cast a shadow, so you can always tell when you are over a platform. Luckily, you do get unlimited continues, and if you do die, you always restart exactly where you died, which is a really nice touch. Dotted around the levels are new weapons and power-ups. These come in the form of boomerangs, lasers and shields, that sort of thing. Most of them use ammo, which is collected in the levels in the form of gems that enemies drop, and you can hold up to 500 at a time, which, to be fair, is plenty for most weapons. However, if you do die, you lose everything and go back to your pea shooter, which fires at a weird strange arc and can be tough to aim correctly. Also, you'll find arrows around the levels that point you to the exit, which is nice, but getting there is never as easy as it sounds. Something that really stood out for me here was the music, which was really good. I really enjoyed the music here in the game, and it was almost a little out of place, but it was very high quality and sounded great. It was kind of ominous and it did make me want to keep playing. This is a very simple 3D platform game, but one that's actually way more fun than I expected. I can imagine its simplicity and childish look probably put a lot of people off, but if you like 3D platform games, this is worth a look, even though it won't blow you away. Now here's one for all you truck lovers. It's Ford Truck Mania from Gotham Games, who I believe went on to make games like Project Gotham Racing for the Dreamcast and Xbox 360. This is exactly what it sounds like, a racing game where you control a bunch of manly Ford trucks with some rough, rugged courses to race on. What surprises me here most is that this is actually a pretty good game and not a total pile of crap. The generic name and the fact that it's licensed made me think it was going to be a really cheap rush job with nothing to offer, but actually, while it's by no means the best racing game out there, it's actually a decent one that gave me a few hours of fun. There aren't many trucks to choose from initially, but there's some to unlock as you play. But there's quite a few tracks to race on that range from the farmland to cities and even dirty swamps. It's pretty varied and the tracks have a good amount of twists and turns, though not really much in the way of shortcuts or interactivity. It is a rather bare bones affair. But all the trucks do control surprisingly well, and the career mode does a good job of keeping you invested. There's some nice little touches in the game too, like a track editor where you can make some funky courses to race your mates on, and there's some details like your truck getting muddier as you go around some of the dirty courses that really surprised me, as I didn't think there'd be much in the way of flair here. It's not a very tough game, at least not on the easier difficulties, and I found that I only ever lost races when I was deliberately mucking about or looking for shortcuts, and for the most part I would be way out ahead, which was very good for my ego, but it didn't make the game too exciting. Though the tracks do definitely get harder as you progress, so there is a bit of a challenge. The graphics here are actually quite good, with some nice looking trucks and tracks, and the sound is exactly what you'd expect, engine noises. The music is your typical butt rock, which is fine, and it does make you feel like you're a generic truck lover person, probably called Toby Von something. But yeah, that's all there is to it. It's a pretty no frills racing game, but it has good control, and there's some decent tracks and definitely a bit of fun for a few hours, and it is good with a second player too. Next up is a rhythm game called Friday Night Funkin', which as far as I can tell started its life as a flash game on Newgrounds, but somewhere along the line somebody made it compatible with the PS1, or at least with PS1 emulators. There isn't really too much to say about this one. It's one of those games where you get arrows, then they scroll up the screen and you press the direction when it hits the marker at the top of the screen. You can use either the D-pad or the buttons on the controller, whichever works best for you. Thankfully, the game is quite forgiving with how accurate you need to be, but that doesn't mean it's easy. It's divided into weeks, each of which consist of battles against the computer. There's a bar at the bottom of the screen, and all of the songs start with your opponent going first, essentially showing you the pattern that's coming up, and then you need to copy it in time. It is easier said than done though, and the game gets really tough really quickly, but it's very damn addictive. Every time you hit a correct note, the bar turns green. Miss one and it turns red. Of course, you want to end the level with more green than red, and if you miss too many, then it's game over for you and you have to start again. The main thing here though is the music, and personally I really love it. It's all hip hop, drum and bass sort of instrumentals, and it's great. The characters kind of sing, which is what happens when you hit the notes, and it's a weird high pitched noise that amazingly I didn't find too annoying, which I really kind of like it. The graphics are all very good, it's just 2D sprites and there isn't much in the way of animation, but there doesn't really need to be, and all the characters look really cool and are pretty creative. Racking up good combos gives you high scores, but sadly everything is already unlocked as soon as you start playing the game, so there's really no need to worry about that, or even really completing the levels. But it's still loads of fun to play, and you do get that little bit further every time you do try, which makes you come back again and again. And really that's about it. It's a very simple game, but it's hella fun and has an awesome soundtrack that I would definitely listen to outside of the game. So it's well worth checking out, and it's easy to find, and it would be a great one on a handheld device that can play PS1 games. Our final game for today is Future Cop LAPD from Electronic Arts. In this law-enforcing mech game, you are indeed a future cop, piloting a mech that has two forms. Standard mech that runs about like a T-Rex but is armed with a Gatling gun and rockets. You can then switch to a car mode where you, surprisingly, are a car. This is much faster but less manoeuvrable than the mech mode, but it does have the same weapons. As you're a cop, and it's the future, You have to go to various areas within the city, taking down gangs of criminals and even mutants that are running rampant. You'll enter some large levels filled with various objectives that basically involve blowing stuff up and finding generators to unlock doors. Thankfully, your mech controls incredibly well, and the game is super smooth, which makes playing this one loads of fun. Also, it has a very good lock-on mechanism, so you never have trouble taking down the nearest enemy, though don't get too comfy as enemies can deal some decent damage to you, so you'll need to be on your guard, though running in guns blazing does actually work a fair amount of the time. Each of the missions is pretty large and divided into areas. You've got a handy dandy radar in the top left of the screen that shows you the dozens of enemies that are always bombarding you, as well as some yellow markers which are health and weapon power-ups. Then there's your objectives, which are just green dots, but these only appear when you're close to them, so you will still need to do some exploring. Each of the levels is pretty different, from factories to highways and even beachside residencies. The enemies are mixed up every few levels too, and it's amazing how smooth everything stays. There's a ton of destructible buildings and items on the levels, and thanks to the smooth controls, circle strafing enemies while blowing the shit out of everything on the level is really easy to do, and it's always very satisfying. The graphics here are also very good, with fantastic animation. Everything is quite small on screen, but it still managed to have a fair amount of detail. But this all works fine, and as I said, it helps keep everything smooth. You can't control the camera, but that's fine as it does a good job of zooming in and out when it's needed to. Between levels you can choose your weapon loadout and you'll unlock new arsenal as you progress, getting new machine guns, lasers, flamethrowers as well as rockets, concussion missiles and mines. Each weapon has its place on the battlefield, so you might need to retry levels a few times with different combinations of weapons to see what works best. For example, the flamethrower is powerful but has limited range, Gatling gun is weaker but fires faster and has unlimited range. Weapons all have upgrades in the levels too, which make them way more powerful. It's a good idea to save those for when you're taking on the boss of the stage, as they can be pretty tough. There's also some really impressive FMV cutscenes between levels here too, and the whole game just has a lot of polish to it. I found it really hard to put this one down, and you can even play 2-player co-op, though of course I don't have any friends, so I've not been able to try that, but it is on my list to do. Overall, this really is a fantastic game. It's even got a quite good sense of humour thrown in there, as well as the excellent gameplay, fantastic controls and interesting levels. Make sure you definitely check this one out. So there you go, 10 hidden gems beginning with the letter F. Is your favourite one in here? Let me know in the comments below. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so please do so. We've got loads of cool content for everyone to enjoy, and of course make sure you go back and check out the other videos in this series. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.